Tuition Mobile, quality e-learning experience on the go.
Alright, in this segment we'll be looking at William Shakespeare's Shall I Compare Thee to a Summer's Day. Now, you must know that Shakespeare was very popular for his writing of sonnets. A sonnet is a poem of 14 lines. Now, this can be classified as a romantic poem because it talks about love, although it has not really been established who he was necessarily referring to, whether it was a woman or something else more abstract. But most people actually believe that Shakespeare was referring to a woman in this poem. Now I'll just read a few lines and we'll go straight to the subtopics. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling birds of May, and summer's lease hath all too short a date. Sometime too hot the eye of heaven shines. Now, let us look at the background of this poem. Now, this is a sonnet. It is in the 18th of Shakespeare's collection of his 154 sonnets. Now, the poem was published in 1609. Some scholars believe Shakespeare was in love with a woman who did not really or fully reciprocate the feelings. It is also believed that most of his poems, his romantic poems, were dedicated to a woman. Now, the setting, where was this poem, where did it take place, and at what time was it written? The poem is set in England during the summer season, a season of brightness and sunshine. Using the season of summer to discuss the poet's love for someone is appropriate because it is a season associated with happiness, laughter, and joy. Take note, people abroad always look forward to summer because of the nature of the weather. Laughter and joy, which evidently are emotions that the poet derives from his association with his loved one. Now, the subject matter, what is this poem really about? The speaker opens the poem with a question addressed to a beloved. He started with, shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Now, there is a comparison involved. The romantic mood of the poem justifies the fact that the subject matter of the poem focuses on the relationship between the poetic persona and an unnamed individual. We don't know whether it's a woman or a man or something more abstract. But it's assumed that since Shakespeare is a man, it's just an assumption that the poem is a reference to a woman. However, there is also an ideology here. There's a poetic ideology that was informed by the reputable position occupied by a woman. Now, this poem was written during the Elizabethan period, Queen Elizabeth I, the Queen of England. Women are regarded as embodiments of beauty, and they were accorded great respect and courtesy during that Elizabethan age. The poetic persona goes ahead to justify the antecedents of the beauty of the beloved by talking about the impermanence of natural phenomena. He's saying that this is beauty that can never die, that can never be washed away. Now, the poetic persona declares emphatically that the beauty of his beloved is superior to that of the beautiful season of summer. Now, that is what the comparison in line 1 means. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? The beauty of the beloved is being compared to the beauty of summer. Now, we will just do a brief stanza by stanza analysis. Now, the first stanza, line 1 to 4, it forms the first quatrain of the sonnet. Now, if you look at the rhyming scheme there, shall I compare it to a summer's day? Day, the end line, temperate, May, date. Now, you find out that the rhyming scheme there is A, B, A, B. So, he starts by making a comparison, and he says forcefully, thou art more lovely and more temperate. Now, that statement refers to the perfection of the beauty of his beloved. Now, we move to the next stanza, lines 5 to 8. In the second stanza, there is a rhyming scheme. The rhyming scheme is CD, CD. Dimmed, declines, untrimmed, fade. CD, CD. the poetic persona begins to reinforce the ideas presented in the first stanza. He talks about the fleeting nature of time, an idea that had been presented in line 4. The idea he brings to the fore in these lines is that even the beauty and brightness of nature as embodied in the sun, which is the eye of heaven, a metaphor, are not permanent as they fade with the passage of time. Now, you can see a slightly different idea here. He talked about the perfection of beauty in stanza 1, yet in this second stanza, he's saying that beauty can also fade. Now, in the next lines, line 9 to 12, let me read it briefly. But thy eternal summer shall not fade, nor lose possession of that fair thou hast. As is peculiar to every Shakespearean sonnet, the third quatrain marks a tone or change in the mood or tone. Now the tone changes here. This third quatrain explores the immortality and eternity of the lover's beauty and life. A person whose eternal summer would never fade. He says that the beauty would never die, would never go away. Now the last one, the last stanza, line 13 to 14, these last two lines form a couplet and a rhyme scheme as G, G. Now the end lines there are shade, grossed, can see thee. Alright, so in the last stanza, which is line 13 to 14, the poet expresses describes the beauty of his beloved in this manner. He says, the beauty of the beloved one has been etched graphically on paper. Now, he tries to make it look like the beauty of his beloved is on a painting. And so he says, so long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives these, and this gives life to thee. So now, what he's saying here is that the beauty of his beloved has transformed from mortality to immortality. That is, the beauty of his beloved is immortal. It can never die. Okay, it is within this couplet that the poetic persona finally affirms that his lover will live forever as long as humanity continues to exist. Okay, so now let us look at the themes of this poem. Of course, the first thing here is the celebration of true love. The dominant theme in this poem, shall I compare it to a summer's day, is the idealization and idolization of true love, especially for the woman. The woman is put on a pedestal, on a platform, and is worshipped from a distance as if she were a goddess. Imagine comparing or describing the beauty of a woman as something that never dies. Now, imagine describing the beauty of a mortal as immortal. So, that can only give you the idea that such beauty is described as one that is like a goddess. Okay, the next one, the mortality of man and transience of nature and life. Now, another idea expressed here is, on the contrary, even the most beautiful women, referred to in line 7 as fair, also go through stages of degeneration. On the other hand, beauty could fade. Thus, the poetic persona emphasizes the ephemeral nature of life and everything it embodies. It says in line 4, and summer's leaves had all too short a date. Summer is about how many months? Summer comes and summer goes. So that is how it is also for the beauty of a woman. It suggests that as joyful and as beautiful as summer is, it will eventually give way to another season. So this further reiterates this point. Now, the next one, the next theme, nature is not as beautiful as the loved one. Nature is not as beautiful as the loved one. Now, watch this. The poet establishes very clearly that the idea that nature embodies beauty. The reader is presented with vivid description of the alluring beauty of nature, as represented by the darling birds of May. The poet describes the complexion of the sun as gold. Gold symbolizes value and grandeur. Now, the poet's persona maintains that nature in its beauty and splendor still cannot be compared to the fairness of his loved one. It can be established that the poetic persona appreciates and adores the subject of his adoration because of his emotional attachment to him. Of course, when you love something, when you have a serious emotional attachment to something, every other thing cannot be compared to it. That is the idea that the poet is portraying in this poem. All right, so we will briefly look at the structure of this poem. It is a sonnet, a poem of 14 lines. The first part is an octave, 8 lines, and a sestet, 7 lines. The poem, 14 lines of iambic pentameter, the rhyming scheme A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, E, F, and G, G. The poem is structured in a way that the poet's assertions are presented in 3 quatrains, while the indented couplet gives the conclusion of the whole matter in a powerful manner. Lastly, we will look at the poetic techniques or the poetic devices used in this poem. The first one uses alliteration, fair from fair, in line 7, fair from fair. F alliterates, if you notice. Now it makes use of repetition. So long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives these, and this gives life to thee. Now you note the repetition of so long. He also makes use of metaphor. He says, thou art more lovely and more temperate. Lovely and temperate. Now, another metaphor used there. He also refers to the sun as the eye of heaven. That is a direct reference. The eye of heaven, okay, is what he describes the sun to be. He makes use of personification. He says, in line 5 to 6, human traits of eye and complexion are given to heaven. Heaven, in this context, is an inanimate being, but heaven is described to have eye and complexion. Death is also personified as having the ability to brag. If you check line 11, it says, nor shall death brag thou, wand rest in his shade. So it is assumed that death is said to be boastful. Of course, the first line, another figure of speech used here, is a rhetorical question. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Rhythm. It is enhanced by the use of iambic pentameter. All of the lines in this poem have a pattern of a non-stressed syllable followed by a stressed one. Now, just to digress a little, for us to properly understand poetry, just a few tips on how to understand poetry. You don't just read a poem literally. Sometimes a poem, or rather most times, poems have figurative meanings because they make use of figures of speech. So you must first of all read through the poem, understand the background of the poem. Why was this poem written? As at what time was it written? What were the events or historical happenings that informed or influenced the writing of the poem? So when you understand this, you now begin to, the poem actually begins to make more meaning to you. Well, you may decide to use a dictionary to check for words that you may not be familiar with. That is another way of appreciating poetry. You also have to look out for the figures of speech used. Okay, look out for the figures of speech used so that to understand the idea that the poet is trying to portray. Now we'll look at a sample question here. Using your knowledge of form and structure of the sonnet as your guide, discuss, shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Another question, discuss the poetic devices used in this poem, which have been elaborately discussed in this segment. Now, some of these questions will pop up on your screen in the course of this class so as to determine how much you have learned so far. Thank you.